I've spent 20 years keeping this town safe, but nothing prepared me for the war that started in my own backyard. As the fire chief of Riverside, California, I've handled everything from massive wildfires to complicated rescues. My name's John Miller, and until recently, my biggest challenge was organizing the annual Firefighters Charity Barbecue. Living in a quiet suburban neighborhood, I took pride in my work and my home, especially my carefully planned yard. My yard wasn't your typical green lawn with perfect roses. Instead, I opted for native plants, rock gardens, and drought-resistant vegetation. It wasn't just about saving water. As a fire chief, I knew these plants could help protect homes during fire season. Most of my neighbors understood this, and some even asked for advice on making their yards safer. Life was peaceful until Sandra Matthews moved into the pale blue house next door. From day one, she made it clear she wasn't happy with my yard. While I was watering my desert sage one morning, she marched up to my fence in her designer workout clothes, holding her small dog like it might catch something from my natural landscaping. "This neighborhood has standards," she said, looking at my rock garden like it was covered in trash. "My realtor never mentioned I'd be living next to this." She waved her manicured hand at my yard. I tried explaining the benefits of drought-resistant plants and fire safety, but she walked away before I could finish. At first, I didn't worry too much. In my years of public service, I'd learned that you can't please everyone. But Sandra wasn't the type to live and let live. She started taking photos of my yard whenever she walked past, making loud comments about property values dropping. I'd catch her pointing out my house to delivery drivers and visitors, shaking her head dramatically. My other neighbors found it amusing at first. Tom and Betty across the street would roll their eyes whenever Sandra started one of her yard inspection tours. They'd lived here for 15 years and had always appreciated how I kept my property clean and safe, even if it wasn't a traditional garden. Things got worse when Sandra joined the HOA board. She immediately tried to pass new rules about maintaining neighborhood aesthetics. Thankfully, most board members knew me and understood the importance of fire-safe landscaping. They blocked her proposals, which only made her more determined. She started posting about my yard on the neighborhood Facebook group. "Look what we have to live next to," she wrote, adding unflattering photos taken at weird angles to make my yard look messy. Some neighbors defended me in the comments, mentioning my role as fire chief and the benefits of my landscaping choices. This just seemed to make her angrier. One Sunday morning, while I was drinking coffee on my porch, I noticed Sandra pacing in her driveway, phone in hand. She kept glancing at my house and talking animatedly. I didn't think much of it until I heard sirens. 2 police cars pulled up in front of my house, lights flashing. Officer Rodriguez stepped out, took one look at me sitting on my porch, and tried not to laugh. "Chief Miller," he said, shaking his head. "We got a call about an abandoned property with possible vagrant activity." He glanced at Sandra, who was watching from her driveway with a satisfied smile. The smile faded when Officer Rodriguez walked over to inform her that she was looking at the town's fire chief, not a vagrant. She turned red but didn't back down. "Well, how was I supposed to know? Look at this place. It's bringing down our property values. Someone needs to do something." Word spread quickly about Sandra calling 911 on the fire chief. My fellow firefighters found it hilarious. "Hey chief," they'd joke. "Better mow your lawn before we get another emergency call." But I knew Sandra wasn't going to stop. She was just getting started, and somehow my simple yard had become the battlefield for a neighborhood war. The older lady next door, Mrs. Chun, brought me cookies that afternoon. "Don't let her bother you," she said. "Some people just need to learn that not everyone lives the same way." She was right, but I had a feeling Sandra's lessons were going to come at a cost to everyone's peace and quiet. Later that evening, as I sat in my backyard watching the sunset light up my desert flowers, I couldn't help but wonder how such a small thing could cause so much drama. 20 years of serving this community, and here I was, being treated like a criminal because my yard didn't match someone's idea of perfect. Little did Sandra know, this was just the beginning of a battle she couldn't win. Not against me, but against common sense and community safety. Sandra's anger over her failed 911 call seemed to fuel her determination. The next day, she stood in her driveway handing out flyers to anyone who walked by. The papers had photos of my yard with big red circles around every native plant and rock garden, labeled as hazards and eyesores. Some neighbors took the flyers to be polite, but most ended up in trash cans around the block. What bothered me most wasn't her complaints about my yard. It was how she tried to turn the whole neighborhood against me. She started hosting weekly community improvement meetings in her living room. Through my kitchen window, I could see people going in and out, though thankfully not as many as she probably hoped for. My friend Tom from across the street attended one of these meetings out of curiosity. He came over afterward, laughing so hard he could barely speak. "John, you won't believe it," he said, wiping tears from his eyes. "She made a whole PowerPoint presentation about how your yard is destroying the American dream. She even had pie charts about property values. But not everything was funny. Some new families who didn't know me started avoiding my house when walking their dogs. A couple of real estate agents showing houses on our street would point at my yard and whisper to their clients. It hurt, knowing that people were judging me without understanding the reasons behind my landscaping choices. Sandra's next move was to file official complaints with every authority she could find. The HOA, the city council, the health department. She kept them all busy with papers about my dangerous and unsightly property. Each time, inspectors would come out, find nothing wrong, and leave. But Sandra wouldn't give up. One morning, I found her measuring the height of my desert grasses with a ruler. "The HOA guidelines say no vegetation over 3 feet, she announced loudly, though no one else was around. "These are 3 feet and 2 inches. I wanted to point out that native plants weren't subject to the same rules as decorative grasses, but I knew it wouldn't make a difference. The situation got more intense when Sandra started a petition. She went door to door, trying to gather signatures to force me to normalize my yard. Most neighbors politely declined, but some signed just to make her go away. She proudly announced at the next HOA meeting that she had 20 signatures, in a neighborhood of 200 houses. During this time, I tried to stay professional. As fire chief, I couldn't let personal disputes affect my work. But it became harder when Sandra started showing up at public safety events. She'd stand in the back with her phone, taking photos and probably looking for more things to complain about. The breaking point came during our annual Fire Safety Week. I was giving a presentation at the community center about protecting homes from wildfires. Right in the middle of explaining how native plants can create natural fire breaks, Sandra stood up. "Are you telling people to make their yards look like yours?" she interrupted. "That's dangerous advice from someone who should know better." The room went quiet. Everyone turned to look at her, then at me. I took a deep breath and decided it was time to address this head-on. "Actually," I said calmly, "I'd love to show everyone exactly how my yard helps protect not just my house, but the entire neighborhood." I pulled up photos of recent wildfires in similar communities. Houses with traditional grass lawns had burned, while homes with native landscaping often survived. The audience was interested, asking questions about different plants and safety measures. Sandra stormed out halfway through, but her dramatic exit only made my point stronger. That presentation changed things. People started seeing my yard differently. Some neighbors even asked for advice about adding native plants to their own gardens. The local newspaper ran a story about fire-safe landscaping, using my yard as a positive example. Sandra wasn't quoted in the article, though not for lack of trying. She'd called the newspaper office multiple times. But Sandra had one last move. She hired a lawyer to send me a letter claiming my yard violated some obscure city code from 1962. The letter demanded immediate changes and threatened legal action. I almost laughed when I saw it. That code had been updated decades ago specifically to allow for environmentally friendly landscaping. Instead of fighting back, I invited the city's environmental committee to do a full inspection of my property. They not only approved everything, but asked to use my yard as an example in their new guidelines for sustainable landscaping. When they posted a sign in my yard marking it as a model for fire-safe and water-wise gardening, I thought Sandra might explode. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Her campaign to force me to change my yard had actually helped spread awareness about fire safety and water conservation. More neighbors were starting to add native plants to their gardens, and the HOA was updating its rules to encourage environmentally friendly landscaping. Through it all, I kept doing my job, responding to emergencies and taking care of my yard. Every time Sandra watched me water my desert sage or trim my native grasses, I'd wave and smile. Sometimes fighting fire with fire isn't the answer. Sometimes you just need to let people see the truth for themselves. The tables finally turned one hot summer afternoon when a small brush fire broke out near our neighborhood. As fire chief, I was first on the scene with my team. We contained the fire quickly, but it was a wake-up call for many residents. The fire had spread fastest through yards with traditional grass lawns, while homes with native landscaping, like mine, had actually helped slow its progress. Sandra watched from her driveway as I explained this to a group of concerned neighbors. For once, she didn't have anything to say. The evidence was right in front of everyone. The kind of yard she'd been fighting against had just helped protect our community. Some of the very people who'd signed her petition now stood in my driveway, asking about drought-resistant plants. The local news picked up the story. They interviewed me about fire safety and landscaping, using my yard as a backdrop. The reporter seemed especially interested in how native plants could both save water and protect homes. When Sandra tried to give her side of the story, the reporter politely mentioned that the fire department's recommendations aligned perfectly with my landscaping choices. More changes followed. The HOA held a special meeting to discuss updating our landscaping guidelines. I was asked to give a presentation about fire-safe yards. This time, when I stood up to speak, the room was packed with interested neighbors, not critics. Even Sandra showed up, though she sat in the back corner with her arms crossed. I kept my presentation simple, focusing on practical tips and affordable changes people could make. I showed before and after pictures of yards that had switched to native plants, including the money saved on water bills. When I finished, the questions kept coming for almost an hour. Sandra left early, but not before hearing several neighbors praise the new guidelines. The city council took notice too. They invited me to help develop new landscaping recommendations for the whole town. Soon, signs started appearing in front yards all over the neighborhood. Proud to be fire-safe and water-wise. Each one felt like a small victory, not just for me, but for common sense and community safety. Mrs. Chun, my elderly neighbor, was one of the first to redesign her yard. She replaced her struggling roses with beautiful desert flowers. "My water bill is half what it used to be," she told everyone who would listen. "And look how pretty these blooms are." Other neighbors followed her lead, creating a patchwork of natural gardens up and down our street. Sandra's influence in the neighborhood faded as quickly as it had risen. Her weekly meetings stopped when no one showed up anymore. The flyers disappeared from mailboxes. Even her small dog seemed more relaxed, sniffing curiously at my desert sage when they walked past. One morning, I noticed workers in Sandra's yard. They were removing her perfect grass lawn and bringing in native plants. She didn't say anything to me about it, but I saw her watching carefully as they installed the same kind of rock garden she'd once called an eyesore. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the neighborhood. Weeks passed, and Sandra's yard transformed. The native plants took root and bloomed, adding splashes of color to her once plain lawn. I caught her watering them early one morning, looking almost peaceful. When she saw me, she gave a small nod, not quite friendly, but not hostile either. It was progress. The next fire season was one of our driest on record. But our neighborhood stood as an example of how to adapt and stay safe. Gardens that once guzzled water now thrived with minimal care. The local paper did a follow-up story, calling our street a model of modern, sustainable living. They even interviewed Sandra, who surprisingly admitted that her view on native landscaping had evolved. Looking back, the whole experience taught me something important about change. Sometimes it comes through confrontation, but more often it comes through demonstration. By simply maintaining my yard and explaining its benefits, I'd helped shift an entire community's perspective. At the next firefighters' charity barbecue, we gave out native plant seedlings instead of the usual raffle tickets. The line stretched around the block. Sandra came by with her dog, picked up a few plants, and even stayed for a burger. She didn't say much, but she didn't have to. Her yard said it all. These days, our neighborhood looks different. Gone are the endless green lawns that demanded constant water and care. Instead, we have a variety of natural gardens that reflect the real beauty of our region. Even the wildlife has noticed. Birds and butterflies now fill our yards, adding life and movement to our street. As for Sandra, she still lives next door, but the war is over. Sometimes I see her in her garden, tending to her native plants with the same care she once put into fighting against them. Change isn't always easy, but sometimes the best victories are the ones where everyone wins in the end.